President Cyril Ramaphosa and other leaders are currently in Russia at the moment, but our reporter Govan Whittles is in Warsaw in Poland, and we join him now for a conversation. Govan, good afternoon. Great to catch up with you. Just give us a state of affairs at the moment. Obviously, littered information coming through. Obviously, we learnt that you were caught up in that plane for 24 hours, subsequently let off the plane. Have you finally made your way to Russia?
Well, unfortunately not, Hugo. I'm joining you now from Poland, still in Warsaw, where we're spending 2 nights because the security have been unable to secure our passage to Saint Petersberg. The president is there. The African peace mission is underway. He'll be meeting with Vladimir Putin a little bit later on. But the team of security personnel that was supposed to go ahead of him and prepare for his arrival in St. Petersburg, the same team that was supposed to prepare for his arrival in Kyiv, are with us here in Poland. Their guns are also still on the plane that we flew on, that plane parked at the Chopin International Airport here in Warsaw. We're expected to go back to South Africa on that plane on Sunday. Right now, we're essentially waiting for the president to conclude that African peace mission visit. And then we'll go back to South Africa. I think that they probably need to stay around and can't be seen to leave this region while the president is still in the region, as that's part of protocol. So at this moment, not much good news, but we are monitoring closely the developments that are coming out of St. Petersburg. Also monitored what happened in the Ukraine and the commentary coming from our president, which was very interesting, especially after being told by the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, that Russia should be further isolated. Our president and the Zambian head of state and the Comoros Islands head of state, who's the chairperson of the African Union, and the representatives from Senegal, Uganda, as well as Egypt, all agreeing that there need to be talks between Russia and Ukraine. It's important not only for the sustainability of the grain exports to the African continent, but also as the African Union attempts to assert its authority on this global stage.
Governor, obviously a lot of key issues that we'd like to discuss, and the first is the safety of the president. Now that that contingent of security personnel is stuck with you in Warsaw, how many are with you and how many went ahead or successfully traveled with the president?
Firstly, it's important to understand that this African peace mission was always going to be a tricky security situation for the president because it's a war-torn country that he visited. So because of that, it necessitated a larger deployment of security forces ahead of him. There were 100 of them at least that were deployed, among them the different units of the police. We have to be careful in how we word this because they don't want too much information about which units went with the president, but we do understand it's the Presidential Protection Services, some members of the Special Forces as well. And at the moment, we understand that there is a significant security presence around the president, which travels with him on the Nkwazi official jet. So it's not like he's completely unsecured. But the people that were here were essentially going to be deployed to different points where the president was going to be, and also along the routes to make sure that he would be safe. What we're not getting is information on whether or not they've had to lean on other security services of the other heads of state to patch the holes where there obviously are holes. But what we do know is that a large number of Presidential Protection Services members remain here in Warsaw, Poland.
Now, Govan, you suggest that because it's a war-torn area, the president had to have a contingent of this size. So I suppose it's also implied then that the other 5 or 6 heads of state would have had a similar size contingent. So are there 600 or another 500 other security personnel from the various countries that have also gone ahead, firstly? And secondly, what has been the treatment of the security personnel of the other 5 heads of state?
Well, we firstly know that because of the withdrawal of the presidents of Egypt, Uganda, and Senegal, and only the presence of the Zambian president, the South African president, and the Comoros Islands president and and Congo-Brazzaville presidents being there, it means that there is a lesser number of security personnel that are attending to this mission, although we understand that the delegation of security that accompanied those other heads of state is not on the same scale as the South African delegation, and they have not been held up at any point. Although we are not certain whether those delegations made their way to the Ukraine and to Russia with the same kind of armaments that the South African delegation had, which were at least a half dozen containers full of weapons which would be used by the security personnel, weapons which had been registered with specific permits, and for which the permits, the Presidential Protection Services said, were all in order and submitted to the Polish authorities before their arrival here. So what appears to be the situation here is that the South Africans' weapons are the focus of attention by the Polish authorities, and that the entire delegation couldn't proceed because they wouldn't be able to proceed without getting clearance for their weapons.
Now, the other issue that's been bandied around, Govan, speaks to South Africa and the fact that it has been accused of being non-aligned, and that the Polish are obviously in support of Ukraine, South Africa being accused of being aligned to Russia. Is this the stickler, in your view, of what's caused these problems? Because I'd imagine that there was a party that went ahead of this mission to establish what would be required in order to avert this disaster or catastrophe and potentially impact on diplomatic relations between the two countries.
There was an advance team that came to Poland, as well as a team that went to the Ukraine and to Russia. Those teams successfully carried out their operations in Ukraine and in Russia. And in Poland, they thought that they were successful in negotiating the transit papers for the delegation. But upon arrival here, as we've reported earlier, one of the members of the PPS was strip searched, according to the head of the PPS. And of course, that happened on the tarmac at the airport here in Warsaw. What's also interesting here is that South Africa is maintaining its non-aligned position despite being under pressure to take a different position. That pressure again being exerted understandably by the president of Ukraine yesterday. But another interesting development occurred. That is the fact that the South African president was taken back to the hotel after air raids were sounded in Kyiv. And when those air raids were sounded in Kyiv, shortly afterwards, there were multiple reports of explosions and bombings in the city of Kyiv at different locations. There was one definitive report that a missile from Russia towards Kyiv had been intercepted. That would be unprecedented, as that missile would have been fired at the city while the African heads of state were in that city. The South African president's spokesperson, Mr. Vincent Magwenya, disputed that there were any explosions or bombings in Kyiv. Interestingly, on the front page of the Kyiv Post, there is a headline which describes Mr. Magwenya as the biggest liar in the world for disputing the attempted bombings in Kyiv. And that, of course, further sours the relationship, or at least impacts on the perception of South Africa struggling to maintain its non-aligned movement position while it's negotiating this process. The fact that South Africa is also conducting its own investigation into whether any arms were loaded onto the Russian Lady R vessel when it docked in Simonstown also creates questions around the legitimacy of its non-aligned position and whether it is truly neutral in this conflict. Of course, the South African authorities, the president, the ministers have maintained that they are non-aligned, and what they want is negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, and that's what they hope to achieve by undertaking this peace mission, which is in principle an idea which was formulated at the African Union and is being executed by heads of state delegated by the African Union to perform the task.
So let's go back to that headline. It speaks to certainly either absence of information or a questioning of the integrity of Vincent Magwenya, the presidential spokesperson, on the one hand. On the other hand, it may also suggest that South Africa is protecting Russia by not coming out or not telling what might be a statement of truth. So let's talk about the reception that President Cyril Ramaphosa and the other African heads of state received in Kiev. Is it what they expected? Are they taking any armory, excuse the pun, with them to those negotiations that they're currently conducting in Saint Petersberg?
Hugo, what?
The phone is off.